I am telling you that it is rough out there. Without 92% of AI infrastructure investment this year, we're in a recession. I've never seen a job market like this.
I look at the energy crisis that we're about to enter into on data centers and infrastructure, and I think nuclear is back on the table. The United States is going to build nuclear power plants starting next year.
There's more of an appetite for the step up than I have seen before. And it's because they believe these younger people that are closer to the work, more hands on keyboard. It feels like the market's tougher for the people that are at the very top of their careers.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to Top Line. I'm joined by my amazing co-hosts, Asad Zaman, the CEO of Sales Talent Agency, and AJ Bruno, the CEO of QuotaPath. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about the AI infrastructure bets that are being made across the ecosystem. Are we in a bubble? Just in the past week, the market has had a massive correction. We're trying to figure out what's happening with OpenAI, what's happening with Anthropic. Is all of this just circular deal making, and is there real substance behind all of these deals? Or is it all part of the bubble? So let's get started. Gentlemen, start your engines, please.
Let's go. We have a really fun docket today, but as always, we're going to start with our favorite segment, Quiz Pro Quo.
I think we should do a thing where we say, Quiz Pro Quo.
4 multiple choice questions to frame our conversation and test everyone's knowledge. Guys, question number 1. This one's crazy. What percent of US GDP growth in H1 2025 was attributed to AI-related data center spending? Option 1, 67%. Option B, 25%. Option C, 85%. Option D, 92%.
Oh, wow. Give it to Sam.
AJ.
Sam wants this.
Okay, Sam.
Option D, 92%.
How did you know this?
Because I read the briefing docket.
That is crazy, isn't it? 92% of GDP was driven
terrifying?
For the record, Asad, you usually don't put the questions in the docket.
The question wasn't there, but there was information to say, this is a way to test, do you read the docket? Because there's little tidbits in there.
Asad, it is insane. And what Aswath was saying on the Prof G show, without AI, we're in a recession.
Basically. I heard him say this and I didn't compute it till I read this stat. And then it hits you in the face. Like 92% of the GDP growth was this, which is just bananas.
It is bananas.
Okay. Question number 2. What is the projected electricity consumption for US data centers in 2026 as a percentage of total US generation? AJ, 3.5%, 6.5%, 11.7% or 15.2%.
Command F, electricity in the docket. No, I did read this. And I was actually surprised that it was lower, but I don't remember the exact number. I'm going to go with 3.5%.
3.5% is wrong. It is 6.5%.
I do remember it being lower than there was a number.
It's still
that was
a tremendous amount.
That's
still a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
This one is very interesting. We're doing history lesson.
Which
historical infrastructure project had the highest peak spending as a percent of GDP according to the material? U.S. interstate highway system at 1 to 1.1% of GDP, the Apollo space program at 0.8% of GDP, the 19th century U.S. railroads, or the British railway mania.
I think it was the railroad, but we're going to collaborate on this one, Sam. Sam's looking at it right now.
Sam, you got it right. The railway. It was the railway.
I was the railway.
It was the railway? I was going to say the Apollo space
15
program.
to 20% of GDP.
Yeah. I was hoping you were going to ask, World War II defense spending wasn't one of the options, and that's where I was homing in on.
Okay, this one is my favorite question. At 60% utilization rate, OpenAI's planned 20 gigawatt data center capacity would consume approximately 105 terawatts of electricity annually. This is roughly equivalent to the total annual electricity consumption of which country? Ireland, New Zealand, Portugal, or the Philippines? Either of you two can take this one.
Well, the CFO of OpenAI is Irish, and she made a comment about it in the video about
Oh,
the consumption of OpenAI being
Ireland.
Yeah, let's go with Ireland, but I don't know if that's the answer, but let's go with it.
unfortunately, you are wrong, because at that rate, it would be 3.3 times Ireland's consumption.
Oh my
It was
God.
20 gigawatts, and it was 60.
Who consumes? Does the
60.
Philippines consume more power?
Philippines, it would be, the answer is Philippines at 89. That would be 89% of Philippines consumption. It would also be 2.6% of New Zealand and New Zealand's consumption, and 2.1% of Portugal's consumption.
I
Just
love how you're
their data
saying a bunch
centers
of
running at 60%.
you're saying a
That
bunch of
doesn't make
numbers.
sense. So it's going to be more than Ireland's total consumption,
Yes.
but less than New Zealand's consumption?
No, more
Like-
than New Zealand as well. 2.26 of New Zealand, 3.3.
2.26% of New Zealand means
Not 26, 2.6x.
okay,
Ah,
got it.
there you
Got it. Well, this has been another rousing edition of Quiz Pro Quo.
Rousing.
And if you're still here, dear listener and viewer, come along with us because we're going to talk about what I just mentioned at the top of the show, the AI infrastructure bubble.
Let's go. Okay,
1.21 gigawatts. What's that from?
You know what that
Come
is,
on.
Asad? Do you know what he's
Asid
saying?
doesn't know. Asid
doesn't
laughed,
know.
but he
I
doesn't
don't
know.
know these answers. I'm not good at MCQs.
Back to the
I feel
future.
so-
Come on.
Back to the future.
Okay, so over the last couple of days, we're recording this on November 18th. The public markets have taken a beating. For the first time since the tariffs were announced, the indexes have dipped below their 50-day moving average. This was the longest win streak that the public markets had since right before 2007. Crypto is down. It's shed $1 trillion. Bitcoin is below $90,000 right now. Seems like Wall Street is getting concerned by the AI bubble, by the state of the economy. How are you reading what's happening and what's happened in the last couple of days?
I know that private markets and public markets aren't necessarily directly correlated in real time, and it takes time for all of these things to flow through. But I definitely think that there has been a waning of mania, enthusiasm, hysteria, whatever you want to call the AI enthusiasm over the course of 2025. And we're going to talk about it, of course. But if you watch, what great pub for Brad Gerstner and for BG2. Amazing.
Yeah.
So Sam Altman was interviewed and he was asked, on 13 billion in revenue, how do you plan on supporting $1.4 trillion in data center commitments and infrastructure investments?
Oh, he's got time. Don't worry, Sam. He's got some
He got
time.
really testy. He didn't make a business case for why. He talked about how he wished that they were a public company so that they could have people shorting the stock so that he could squeeze the short sellers, a very circuitous argument. And what I think is that now a lot of the pundits are saying, hey, this is just, to your point, I said earlier, a letting off of steam, right? And that, we're just recalibrating. People are taking their profits. I think it's probably more than that. And I definitely think it'll have a dampening effect on VC funding in Q4, or at least from here on out, because I think there's still this gap between AI perception of utility and value and what's actually happening in production. And I think that that doesn't mean there isn't value. That just means that that the market had run ahead, and I think VC funding had run ahead. And if you look again, just the simple math of how many times does 13 billion, and that's, by the way, that's 13 billion at negative something gross margin. That's 13 billion where they're going to lose $30 billion. And that's not including their $1.4 trillion commitments. I think people are starting to unpack this. Everybody assumed it would be unpacked before and that it was circular financing. Asid Zaman said, no, it's not circular financing. They're just risk off and they're N of one. They're just great deal makers. And you can print money when you're just a great deal maker. That's the question we're talking about. The point that, we had our briefing doc. If you haven't seen Aswath Damodaran get interviewed by Scott Galloway on his podcast, you should. But he makes the point in that show, without that 92% of AI infrastructure investment this year, we're in a recession. And tying it back to go to market, I will tell you, I have never seen Asad, I'm sure you're doing well because there's still opportunity and people need to backfill these roles. But I've never seen a job market like this for go-to-market operators, and to the negative. I've never seen so much volatility. I'll give you a stat. We have about 35 founding members of Pavilion Gold. Dear listener, if you remember, those are supposed to be operators at 100 million and above, CROs and CMOs. A third of that community has changed jobs or been fired in only 6 months of the membership tier existing. So
Wow.
I am telling you that it is rough out there. And so it makes, I think, and at the same time, we have to see where these inflation prints come out and whether the Fed's actually going to lower interest rates, but they're not so keen on doing that. I think we're back where we always have been since 2021, which is in a period of pronounced and extended volatility and uncertainty. And I think we got to keep our heads down and operate really intelligently. AJ, what do you think?
Well, it's a really interesting point on that last part in this extended period of volatility, but it always feels like we've kind of come out the other side, but there hasn't been like one catalyst, one thing. It's like, oh, now we're out of it. And I don't know if this is different or if it's just in this moment of time, everyone's kind of having this like little bit of a panic sell-off button right now. I mean, Nvidia's earnings was that last week or was that this?
No, tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Nvidia's earnings are tomorrow. That's right. We're filming this on November 18th. I actually appreciated Asad. We were at the point in Top Line where we actually have to say the day we're filming because so much happens every single day that this could be out of date when this comes out on Sunday.
It'll be very different. It'll feel
very, totally very different. So my point being is that I don't know. I agree with you on the private market and that level of volatility. I've mentioned this, and we'll talk about this later in the go-to-market session. But a few friends' companies that were out on the market to be sold, and both have had to pull back because they haven't found a buyer. Not only did they just find a buyer, they didn't even get any offers. Wow. And that is really, really interesting given
they
both
hire
are
a banker.
at scale.
So they must have hired a banker.
They hired a banker. Yeah, they hired a banker. Both hired bankers, and both had over 300 plus conversations and signed NDAs to not get somewhere. And we'll talk about maybe some of the reasons why there. But at the end of the day, it's a data point that shows that we're in this like challenging moment at the end of the year and a bunch of unknown headed into 26. Asad, what are your thoughts?
Let me share one data point before Asad goes. By the way, it's kind of nice not having a guest, I have to say. just us girls. On September 4th, Oracle was at $223 a share. On September 10th, after the OpenAI deal was announced, Oracle was at $328 a share. I think that represented some. Do you know how much in market cap that represented? What is like at $1 trillion of market cap or something like that?
It's under $1 trillion.
Today it's at $220. So wow. Oracle is now below the level that effectively the OpenAI deal has been completely repriced and discounted, and the value of it to Oracle is now deemed to be zero.
Isn't that crazy? I think.
What do you think, Asad? You're the stock
I think
picker.
The market is digesting these bits and pieces of information. I think Sam Altman's deal making might have been too much. Because if you actually look at the timing of these announcements, it all happened in like 6 weeks. And it was too much. It was too crazy. I don't think the market was able to digest that well. He felt very testy. Alit Starp from Palantir has come across quite testy in recent interviews. But then when you just step back and you look at really what's driving all of this concern is, I think, this heavy investment in infrastructure. And if 92% of the GDP was driven by that investment, I think the threat to pull is that the rest of the economy is not doing all that well. And so if the rest of the economy is not doing all that well, I think what they would have hoped to see was in this last set of earnings reports, there was a little bit more caution than I think the big spenders, the big tech companies with all this CapEx investment, more than they ended up showing. They came very bullish with their spend statements. And I think when analysts computed all of that together, they're like, this is getting a bit crazy. We need to take some money off the table because this might end badly. And one could argue that if there's a bubble being formed, it can either burst, it can build up, burst like it did in 2000, and then you've got years of just silence in the market, or this is, or we go back to the fact that AI is real. It's a proper platform shift. It's the industrial revolution of our age. It's going to change how we do everything. It's going to take a minute, and we're going to get a little bit crazy along the way. And along the way, we're going to have a couple of these mini corrections. Where we just reprice things as new information presents itself. And I think there'll be another one next year, because if you think about some of the stocks that have really run up, there are these, the companies that build the data centers, provide the cooling for the data centers, provide the equipment for that data center. Building a data center is really hard. There's delays, there's power, there's regulations, there are towns and cities that are pushing back. Those delays, because all these companies have revenue commitments that are far ahead of where they need to be. They're, from a demand perspective, they're sorted, but if they can't build in time, that's going to scare the market as well. And so I think there'll be another one of these next year. But I'm not sure how this plays out, Sam, in the private markets, because I'm just thinking back to 2021, 2022. We knew inflation was a problem in late 2021. The public markets corrected in Q3 and Q4 of 2021. The private markets were the hottest they'd ever been from a job market perspective at the end of Q1 2022. Our best ever quarter in history was Q2 2022. It took a while for the private markets to stomach what was going on. And I wonder if this is what's going to happen, where we'll have this build up with mini corrections along the way. I don't know if the private markets are going to be able to digest that new thing, because in between, there'll be exciting news as well. There'll be breakthroughs. There'll be things that capture mindshare and attention. And I think that'll keep VCs going pretty aggressive. Private markets, I project, will be as aggressive as they were this year. Public markets will be up and down a little bit.
We see this with innovation just more broadly, where when you innovate, typically your supply and demand meet each other. In this case, our supply is way under the demand, and it's for the reasons you just said. You have governments that are involved in this in a very big way, both at the federal and the local level. That bureaucracy takes time and can't meet the pace of AI in general. So you just have this giant delta that is like lagging behind, that feels like it's just this pent up energy, and it's not going to be solved overnight. So like that, we're sitting at this really, really interesting time where we're watching everyone talk about what the future could be, and they could build it if we had the infrastructure to do so.
I think you guys are making great points. I guess what I'm hearing inside of the pavilion community is pretty bleak, which I mentioned earlier. And when I talk to people, so what would drive continued VC funding? I think there are going to start to be points on the board when it comes to whether this experimental run rate revenue and whether ARR is actually real, whether, as Cassie predicted, there's going to be this GRR, this retention apocalypse, because all of these AI companies haven't invested in customer success or customer support, and the use cases aren't quite as obvious as they think. And then the final question related to both of that is, are buyers still, do they, and I know this is a question that I think you've been asking, Asad, like, do people still have their checkbooks out? Are they still in buying mode, or have they made a bunch of bets in the first half of the year and now they'd like to see them play out and be a little cautious? I can tell you that, again, if you're selling, I can't speak to every AI native business, and I have talked to a few businesses that have done really well and gone from small to 4 million, so pre-revenue to 4 million, pre-revenue to 4 million this year. So, and then another company that went from pre-revenue to about 1.5 million. But what I hear is that deals are getting pushed, and what I hear is that people aren't quite so sure. And I think buyers are news enthusiasts just like all of us. And they see what's happening in the stock market, and they are aware that they are possibly participating in some kind of bubble, indirectly or directly. And so I'm more pessimistic than you, Asad. I think Q1 and the rest of, maybe there's people that have issued term sheets and they're going to close those deals before the end of the year, and there probably is a little bit of a rush to happen right now. But I think especially the first half and Q1, I don't think it's going to be very positive. And I think there's going to be a lot of companies that have raised at very large valuations that are going to have to, and I think there's going to be fraud. I think AJ's pointed this out. There's going to be a lot of people that will lie until the last minute about what is ARR and what is actually revenue, and how should they think about it and what their gross margin is, so that they can show that they're not just an LLM wrapper. And I think those points on the board are going to cause a little bit of a chill in the funding environment. And by the way, if you're non-AI native, there already is a chill, and it's really hard. And there's I was at dinner this past weekend with a bunch of founders that have gone from 0 to 1.5, and they don't think they can raise in Europe at all. And they think that they need to go to the US to find people that believe in traditional B2B SaaS, even though they quote unquote have an AI story. So I see times as being more uncertain than tough, but uncertainty, markets abhor uncertainty. And I think there's a lot of people that aren't sure how to process the age that we live in.
One thing I've noticed anecdotally is that a lot of companies, they typically do their financial planning for the next year, start in August, and then kind of like wrap up in September, October. A lot of our customers are still very deep in 26 planning process. And I've just noticed this with like bigger partners, companies that are doing $2 billion in revenue that we would all know that we've talked about are still very, very deep in planning process. And our other customers that we're working on from a comp strategy, incentive strategy, have they're really just lost. And it's something that you can tell headed in the next year, there's a lot of that anxiousness and that uncertainty you're built up. You can usually tell in these like markers, these things you can see and just know that it's like there's some nervous people out there right now.
I think the scenario that you guys are painting is obviously real. Like we've discussed the haves and have-nots in this market. So there is a group of people for whom it feels very tough, very rough. And that's real. I also think that the scenario, Sam, that you were painting has a high probability of happening next year. The variable that I think is going to affect it is that we're still at a point where this technology keeps improving significantly every few quarters. There are significant improvements over 24 and 25. And if it continues improving, if there are breakthroughs, so there's incremental improvements, I think even incremental improvements will keep the market feeling quite positive because it'll give buyers a new thing to buy. How can you spent this money, you bought these things, and you won't buy this breakthrough thing that's happening right now? So there's like, that can keep buyer attention in market. I also think that'll keep investors trying to get into the right company, because what you don't want to be is the investor that invested heavily in the first couple of years, but invested in most of the Jaspers of the platform shift. And then as things started getting real, you missed. And so I think they'll stay. And so it really comes down to how probable do we think the improvements in the technology are? And I would bet that so much money and brain power is going into that there should be a couple of big moments next year with regards to improvements in the AI that will keep things feeling a little bit like this year. There will be pain, but the pain will get digested, in my view, as it has this year with all the exuberance that happens at the edge of the ecosystem. Because this year, there's been a group that's had a very painful experience. As they just said, somebody's trying to sell their company. No one even wants to look at it. We've seen people lose their jobs, can't find a new job. Like there is pain today, but it doesn't feel the way that 2023 pain felt when it was like everybody was.
There's nothing there. I think that's the optimism that you're talking about. Sarah Fryer, the CFO of OpenAI, had a really good analogy in her interview recently about electricity. And we've turned the lights on, but we haven't been able to do anything with the lights. So the lights are there. Everyone can see electricity and see how excited they are, but it's not powering anything right now. There's no dishwasher, there's no ovens right now. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, in that like everything you're talking about, Sam, is very, very real. Everything I'm talking about is very real, but we're all looking to the future in that very optimistic way. And it's really interesting to see the public markets start to waver off of that optimism in a way of like, well, maybe it's not as bright as we think it's going to be.
Well, one more data point, by the way. I was talking to an Israeli VC who they do Series A, Series B, B2B SaaS. So they're not really AI first investors. And their portfolio had a terrible Q3. So one more data point. Now, they always say they're not sure if it's because the Jewish high holidays and they try to only invest in Israeli companies in Q3, but nevertheless, that was one more data point, and they're trying to see what's going to happen in Q4. My question to you both is, what do we, we read business books. We typically, right? Typically, you're supposed to focus. Typically, you're supposed to figure out what is your strategy. You're supposed to say no to a bunch of different options, and you're supposed to execute against your core strategy. And Sam Altman is not doing that, right? Sam Altman is moving in every possible direction at the same time. And the central hypothesis seems to be the market is a winner take most market. We must grab as much share in as many different directions as possible. Maybe there's a part of it that is a strategic, misdirection for competitors. We're doing this, we're doing that. I can't keep track of all of the launches that OpenAI has at any given time. And then in an interview with Brad Gersner, he was talking about how he mentioned the consumer device business, the Johnny Ive business, whatever it is that they're building, the hardware device. And so it really feels, as Asad would say, right, risk on. They are risk on, like they are pursuing. They have an open checkbook, according, based on their perspective. They're going to go in every possible direction. Maybe some of them end up not working out. They're effectively, an AI-focused VC with a large market share, and they're trying to deploy capital in as many different directions as possible, because when the dust settles, they hope to have as much market share and control the market in a way. It doesn't feel as focused or strategic as Anthropic. And when you look at cash flow projections for OpenAI versus Anthropic, Anthropic is much closer to being cash flow positive and profitable. I think it happens in 27 or 28 when OpenAI is talking about 2030. And again, 13 billion in revenue. And then Sam will say, we have a lot more revenue than that, whatever. It pales in comparison to 1.4 trillion in commitments and side deals. So what's your perspective on, let me ask you this question, Asa, because you're a stock picker. OpenAI is public today. Assume it goes public at its last private market valuation. So whatever that is, what is it, 500 billion? Are you a buyer?
Oh yeah, I would put like 20% of my thing into it, of my stock holdings. I would liquidate 20 to 30%.
You would put 20% of your net worth.
I generally am concentrated. Like right now, I'm like 50% plus in Alphabet, and it's been fun. So I am concentrated.
I love that we're talking about bubble. I mean, it's Alphabet, so Google, whatever. But we're talking about, there's definitely a bubble. And then Asad's like, I'm all in. I'm doing this.
Yeah, I would ride it, because I actually think OpenAI will have the retail buyer the way Palantir has the retail buyer. And while the markets are stable-ish, they'll be one of the companies that'll get one of the crazy multiples out there. So I actually think that, listen, it seems crazy and haphazard to us, but I'm sure that they have a really nicely distilled strategy doc that starts with, we want to be the most useful AI agent for you in your personal life. And then from there, all the things we need to do to be able to do that. And I'm sure they can articulate this really nicely. They also have 700 million users or more. So they have almost 10% of the world that's using it on a regular basis. And that gives them more surface area to try things, more investments that they can make than a company that's smaller and earlier on in its journey and has less access to, I think, resources than them. The core difference between Anthropic and them is consumer versus B2B. They want to own the consumer world, and Anthropic is really fighting hard on the enterprise side, and they have a lead over that. I think both are great companies. Both will be great outcomes. But I do think that if OpenAI today, I think they can articulate their strategy cleanly, but it will feel haphazard because there's just so much going on. And anything they do, some of the more meaningful things they do, move markets. And so that, I think, comes with a certain vibe. I think Anthropic will continue doing well in the enterprise, but will not be 70% of the enterprise. They'll be maybe the number one or number two player there, and that would be a great bet for companies.
Austin, when OpenAI releases their computer hardware, are you buying it day one?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
But why not? I like spending money and buying things. I would buy their stuff.
Is there a valuation at which you would not buy the stock?
If it was like $2 trillion today or $1 trillion today, I wouldn't buy it. I would think that's
$1 trillion is just twice as valuable. I mean, it's At 1 trillion, it's still what, 20% of what Nvidia's worth. It's still worth less than Apple, right?
I
It's
would
worth less
buy a
than Meta.
lot at their last valuation at 13 billion in revenue and more than $1 trillion in valuation. I would be a little bit cautious over there. I
Okay,
would be.
but not at 500 billion.
Yeah, throwing
No,
caution to the wind at
500
500
billion.
bill.
I would feel 500 is, I can get convinced around 500 billion. $1 trillion is almost like there's something emotional about being $1 trillion company. I feel like you need far more than 20 billion in revenue to be at the trillion mark. It's less about the number and something about the significance of having $1 trillion market cap. Is SpaceX $1 trillion now?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm a shareholder, but who knows?
Question for you guys as we wrap this up.
I'm very deep in SPVs. I don't really know. I have 5 SPVs above me.
I'm getting pitched SPVs up the
Left,
wazoo.
right, and center.
Now from Asid. Asid's pitching me SPVs.
Question for you guys. We've got a spectrum. One side is optimism, the other side is pessimism. The pessimists say that this is a fancy prediction engine. We're over-investing. This is a bubble. This is Enron. This is crazy. And then the optimists are saying this is the industrial revolution of our age and time, and this is going to change the world, and there'll be massive winners that are built around all of this. And so if those are the two ends of the spectrum, as operators, where are we supposed to land on this as we go towards 2026? Like, if it's 1 to 10, 10 is like fully optimistic, 1 is super pessimistic, where should we be mentally to be able to fight the fight that we're supposed to fight in 2026, Sam?
6.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm a long-term optimist, short-term pessimist. I think the most interesting stuff for me is how AI can interact with the real world. And so I get excited about Tesla. I get excited about robotics. And we're going to have, the CEO Pickle robot on the show at some point soon. I think that feels like an industrial revolution when you can actually put robotics into homes, into the world in ways that dramatically enhance quality of life. And I think that will change things a great deal. I think in the short term, though, I'm not sure how it's all going to play out. I think some of the use cases, at least in go-to-market, are, I'm skeptical of. Mm-hmm. There was a big conversation in Pavilion, and then I'll hand it over to AJ, but I just think it's funny. We had a big conversation in Pavilion around I think the AI go-to-market channel about Lemkin talking about publishing his results of vibe coding and how, he gets 7%, 6 to 7% reply on outbound versus 1 to 2% from the industry. This is all using an AI SDR. And he doesn't disclose in that profile that he did. I think that he did a webinar with Replit that, he invested in the AI SDR company, and what he calls outbound, he's just emailing previous registrants and attendees a SaaSter. And that's, I think, part of what's happening in the AI go-to-market space. I don't see some major breakthrough. I could be wrong. I want to be wrong, but so I'm a 6.
Anyone that's ever cold called themselves, this is where I test go-to-market people, because if you've ever made any cold calls in your life, you know how much you get hung up on by real humans. Now imagine you have to disclose your AI. That's a 99% hang-up rate. And so you can't just abdicate your outbound to these emails, and you can't use an AI saying hi, because it has to disclose it by law. So it has to start with, I am AI calling you from Gong. And what are you going to do? End call. And so I feel very bearish about that. But AJ, on the spectrum, where are we supposed to be? Where are you?
So 1 to 10, what was 10 was like
10 is super optimistic.
1 is pessimist.
Okay. 1 is Benedict Evans.
Well, I was feeling great about things until Sam showed up to this call. I was so on. I think I'm still an 8. I think I'm still very, very, very bullish on it. I'm positive. I feel that, and maybe that's where I'm sitting in my own world and what I'm seeing for our own numbers and how we're going through planning, and we're going to take some big risks next year. So it's probably selection bias. But at the same time, I don't see anything that's really fundamentally changed the optimism from the beginning of the year. We're like, yeah, ChatGPT 5 had a little bit of a slip up when it was released, and
Something changed. 92% of the GDP was data center spend. Like that was
well,
that's
I mean, from in terms of optimism and where we're headed, we knew we had to make those bets and put that infrastructure. And I think what has changed is how it's messaged and the circular investment and some of those. Like, I feel like Larry Ellison getting caught up in the hype machine of his own stuff, and Oracle trying to be relevant as a 50-year-old company or whatever. Like that's fine, but at the same time, I don't feel that. I think we're on the same track. We're like, get there itis is feeling like, oh, we've got to do it now. I'm like, no, we're squarely on the path to AGI. So bring it on. I'm an 8.
I feel like I was an 8 or 9, but I am closer to a 6 or 7 now. I'm super optimistic. I'm generally an optimistic person, and I think there's a lot of money to be made right now in this market, and I think there's a lot of money to be made by being useful to AI companies as well. But not only doing that. So I think next year will be a really good year. But the reason I'm down a little bit is I was really spending a lot of time thinking about when the bubble might burst. And I was very sure it wouldn't be next year. I was thinking it'll be 27 or 28. But I was thinking of it along the lens of there will be one big burst and then there will be some time of quietness in the market. And now I'm recalibrating to over the next 2 or 3 years, we might have a bunch of corrections. And so I haven't gotten comfortable with that idea or done any sort of thinking around how to create organizational resiliency for it. Maybe it's already built in based on the work we did come through the last few downturns. But because I haven't computed that, I would say probably a 6 or 7 for now.
With that, another great episode in the can. Give us 5 stars on Spotify or iTunes. Smash subscribe on YouTube. And thanks for listening, everybody. Another episode of Top Line.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.